and calling us to a place of, not a place of judgment, but to a place of love. And the other thing that's disturbing about this, and especially within Christian tradition today, is that we have sacrificed love of self for love of others. You see, the reality is that the commandment says, from its original translation, and a better translation for us, I think, in our world today, it says that we are called to love God first, but then we're called to love our neighbor to the same degree that we love ourselves. Now listen to that one more time. We are called to love our neighbor to the same degree that we love ourselves. And so I ask us, so when we're out there loving our neighbor, when we're out there denying ourselves and being of service to other people, if we truly are loving them to the same degree that we love ourselves, how much love are we really giving them? How much love are we really giving them if we are called to love our neighbor to the same degree that we love ourselves? I think one of the biggest sicknesses in the church today is low self-esteem. I believe that one of the biggest sicknesses in the world today is low self-esteem. We have been so beaten up in this world by all sorts of things that we have very little value for who we are. In fact, sometimes I think that we cover ourselves up in order to cover the shame and the guilt that we carry around with us in this world. We've been so criticized for who we are that we often carry that around in our bodies. And so I think that what we do sometimes is that we love our neighbor so that we don't have to love ourselves. That we go about doing all this good stuff for everybody else because we're frightened to focus on ourselves. We're frightened to actually look at our hearts and begin to believe that we really are okay, that we really are lovable, that we really are made in the image of the divine presence of God. How many of us have been taught that we're not made in the divine image of God? I know I heard that when I was growing up. Everybody else is made in the divine image of God, but not you. You know, it was a message that we seem to have had reinforced over and over again. And the sad part about that is that if we believe that, then everybody else was being told that God could love everybody else but not me as well. And what that means that if you actually put that all together, that then really God does love all of us, but we have self-doubted that God could really, truly love us. Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and learn to love your neighbor to the same degree that you love yourself. You know, this is not just a sickness that we've seen in our world today. This was a sickness that Peter was grappling with. In this gospel reading this morning, we heard where Jesus is telling them to new commandment, as I have loved you, love one another. And Peter says, in my response, he says, well, you know that I love you. And Jesus says, you know, the reality is that even before the cock crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. And I believe that Peter denied Jesus 3 times, not because he was afraid of the persecution that would face him, but I think that Peter denied Jesus 3 times because he wasn't yet ready to receive the fullness of the image of the divine God that is within him. He wasn't yet ready to stand up and totally acknowledge for himself that just the way that Jesus had loved him, he was able to love others because of guilt, because of shame, because of all of the things that have reinforced themselves in our lives through the culture within which we exist. Self-doubt, self-guilt, self-shame. You know, over and over again, when folks come to me for spiritual counseling or to sit and talk with me, at the root of everything that goes on in their lives, more often than not, is a self-doubt of who they are. A self-doubt that they really could be powerful. A self-doubt that they really could achieve everything that they would desire in their lives. A self-doubt that they see everybody else achieving, but they're not able to acknowledge that they can achieve themselves. Now, this is not prosperity preaching. I'm not talking about prosperity preaching. I'm talking about coming into the fullness of the power of who you are as children created in the divine image of God. I'm talking about coming into the fullness. Can you really imagine what this world would be like if we really all came into the fullness of the power of the God who created us and the God who loves us? That if we were able to put to one side self-doubt and self-shame and begin just to live in the love of God in our lives? Can you imagine what it would be like if the words of others didn't hurt us? Can you imagine what it would be like if the actions of others didn't hurt us? Now, I don't think there's one of us in this room this morning that can say that we don't have people in our lives who hurt us with words and hurt us with actions. And I don't think there's one of us that can say that those words and those actions, even though we try to put up these little barriers and these defensive walls around ourselves, there's not one of us that can say that those words and actions haven't penetrated the very heart of who we are. And every now and again that chips away at the very fabric of our lives. Jesus calls us to love ourselves. And one of the great lessons for us in loving ourselves is that the actions of others, the desires of others, the hurts and the pains of others, one of the greatest things that we can learn is that that should not damage the self-love of who we are. Now that's a hard lesson. That's a very, very hard lesson. Because the reality is that we also want to please other people. We are people pleasers. And that's a human condition. As a pastor, I'm a people pleaser. I want people to like me. Otherwise the church is empty on a Sunday morning. But sometimes as pastors, we have to say some of the tough truths and the tough realities, and that steps on some people's religious toes. But the reality is that if we are called to be faithful to the gospel of Jesus Christ, then we must be faithful to preach this fundamental message that we are called to love one another as God has loved us. No greater love has anyone than that they would lay their lives down for you. That means that Christ has already paid for our guilt and our shame. There's no amount of guilt and shame that we can layer on upon our lives that Jesus didn't already go to the cross for. There is nothing that we have done, nothing that we are doing, or nothing that we will do in the future that can separate us from God's love. And so this guilt and this shame that we layer upon ourselves is futile. It's futile. We need to let it go, sisters and brothers. And we need to let it go so that we can let go of that guilt and shame and build up that sense of love. The love that God has for us. The perfect love. Not the conditional love that we put on one another. I'll love you if you do what I say. I remember when I was growing up as a kid, I didn't like vegetables. And now today we hide vegetables in ravioli. I was watching a commercial recently. It said, this tin has 1 serving of vegetables. But don't tell the children, because if they did, they wouldn't eat it anymore. But I remember growing up, I didn't like my vegetables. And, I would eat the meat, and I would eat the gravy and the mashed potatoes, because that was always great. But those green things that were always on the plate. And, I remember my mom would use every trick in the book to try and get me to eat my vegetables. She would hide them in the mashed potato. And, I don't know why she thought I wouldn't see them. But, but we do all these crazy things, right? And she would hide them. And I would, eventually I would move things to the side of the plate because I didn't want to eat my vegetables. And I remember once my mom said, if you love me, you'd eat your vegetables. That's a real guilt trip, But it's not just something our parents do. We do it to each other too. If you love me, you go and make me a coffee.